The convoy stopped moving at exactly 0347 hours. That's when Captain Elena Vasquez knew something was catastrophically wrong. 3 armored vehicles sat motionless in the Afghan valley, engines running, but no forward progress, no radio chatter, no explanation, just silence where there should have been orders. She was the convoy's logistics officer, responsible for supply routes, not combat operations. But in the 30 seconds it took for her instincts to screen danger, Elena Vasquez became the only officer who saw what everyone else missed. The enemy wasn't outside the convoy. The enemy was already inside. 12 hours earlier, she'd been reviewing maintenance logs at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, a hardscrabble outpost carved into the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The base housed 200 soldiers, a strategic position that controlled access to 3 critical supply routes. Elena had spent 8 months there, managing the constant flow of equipment, ammunition, and personnel that kept American operations running in one of the most hostile regions on Earth. She was good at her job, meticulous, the kind of officer who caught discrepancies others missed. That morning, she'd noticed something odd in the fuel consumption reports. Vehicle 7, a standard transport truck, had burned through twice the expected fuel on its last 3 missions. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to make her curious. She pulled the maintenance records and found something stranger. The truck had been serviced by an external contractor 2 weeks ago, a repair that wasn't scheduled and wasn't authorized through normal channels. The signature on the work order belonged to Master Sergeant David Rollins, the base's senior logistics NCO, and Elena's direct subordinate. She trusted Rollins. Everyone did. 22 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, and a reputation for getting things done when regulations got in the way. He was the kind of soldier who made the military work, someone who understood that sometimes you had to bend the rules to accomplish the mission. Elena had relied on him since arriving at Sentinel, but now, staring at that unauthorized maintenance order, she felt something shift in her chest, a whisper of doubt. She found Rollins in the motor pool, supervising a routine inspection. When she asked about the work order, his response came too quickly, too smooth. A contractor he knew from a previous deployment. Emergency repair that couldn't wait for proper authorization. He'd filed the paperwork retroactively, just hadn't gotten it processed yet. Everything he said made sense. Everything except the look in his eyes, gone for just a fraction of a second before his usual confidence returned. Elena didn't push, not then. Instead, she did what any good officer would do. She started investigating, quietly. Over the next 6 hours, she pulled service records, fuel logs, and maintenance reports going back 3 months. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemicals. Unauthorized repairs on 5 different vehicles, fuel discrepancies across multiple convoys, equipment requisitions that didn't quite match actual inventory. Nothing obvious, nothing that would trigger automatic reviews. But together, they formed a picture that made Elena's blood run cold. Someone was systematically compromising base vehicles. The question was why, and the answer came at 1,800 hours, when she received orders for a midnight convoy mission. 3 vehicles carrying classified communications equipment to a forward observation post. The route would take them through the Korengal Valley, a stretch of road where half the coalition casualties in the region had occurred. Vehicle 7 was listed as the primary transport, the same truck with the unexplained fuel consumption. Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Equipment failure, tracking device, something worse. She had two choices: report her suspicions up the chain of command based on circumstantial evidence and risk destroying the career of a decorated NCO, or say nothing and potentially send soldiers into an ambush. The third option came to her as she stood in the dusty motor pool at sunset, watching Rollins coordinate the convoy preparation. She would go on the mission herself. It wasn't standard procedure. Logistics officers didn't typically ride convoys into hostile territory, but Elena had the authority to inspect any transport under her jurisdiction, and this equipment was sensitive enough to justify command oversight. When she informed the convoy commander, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, that she'd be joining them, he looked surprised but didn't object. Rollins, standing nearby, went absolutely still for just a moment. Then he nodded and went back to checking manifests. They rolled out at midnight, 3 up-armored vehicles carrying 12 soldiers and equipment worth millions of dollars. Elena rode in the command vehicle with Chen, watching the darkened landscape slide past through night vision tinted windows. The valley was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that preceded violence in this part of the world. Chen seemed nervous, constantly checking his radio and scanning the ridgelines for threats. 2 hours into the journey, they reached the narrowest part of the valley, where the road wound between steep hillsides that limited visibility and offered perfect ambush positions. This was where convoys got hit, where RPGs and small arms fire turned armored vehicles into death traps. Elena's hands were sweating inside her gloves. She kept thinking about those maintenance records, about Rollins's eyes when she'd asked about the unauthorized work order. That's when the convoy stopped. No warning, no explanation. The lead vehicle simply halted in the middle of the road, and the others followed standard procedure, spacing themselves defensively while they waited for the issue to be resolved. Chen tried his radio. Nothing. He tried again, calling each vehicle individually. Silence. Elena felt her pulse spike. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was deliberate. She grabbed Chen's arm and spoke quietly, urgently. Something's wrong. We need to dismount and check the other vehicles manually. Right now. Chen looked at her like she was overreacting, but something in her tone made him pause. Before he could respond, the driver's door on their vehicle clicked open from the outside. It was Rollins, standing in the darkness, weapon in hand, expression unreadable. "Sir," he said to Chen, his voice calm and professional, "we've got a situation. The lead vehicle's communications are down. I need you both to come with me to assess." Every instinct Elena had was screaming. This was wrong. The way Rollins stood, the way he'd appeared without warning, the fact that he was here at all when he should have been back at base. She made a decision in that split second. "Negative," she said, her hand moving to her sidearm. "Sergeant Rollins, step away from the vehicle." "That's an order." Chen looked at her in shock. Rollins didn't move. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Rollins smiled, and it was the saddest smile Elena had ever seen. "I'm sorry, Captain," he said. "I really am. You weren't supposed to be here." What happened next happened fast. Elena drew her weapon, but Rollins was faster. He didn't shoot. Instead, he stepped back and raised his radio, speaking rapidly in Pashto, a language he'd learned during his multiple deployments. Elena's Pashto was basic, but she understood enough. He was calling off an attack, telling someone to abort. Chen was on his feet now, weapon drawn, confused and angry. "What the hell is happening, Sergeant?" Rollins lowered his radio, keeping his hands visible. "Sir, there are 12 Taliban fighters on the ridgeline to the east. They've been tracking this convoy since we left base. In approximately 3 minutes, They were going to open fire with RPGs and destroy all 3 vehicles. Every soldier in this convoy would have died. Elena's mind was spinning. You set this up, the maintenance, the fuel logs. You planned an ambush on your own convoy. Rollins's expression was complex. Pain and resignation mixed with something else. Determination. No, Captain, I prevented one. Those fighters have been planning this hit for weeks. I've been their source, feeding them information about convoy schedules and routes. Tonight, I told them this convoy was carrying something worth dying for. High-value communications equipment that would give them a strategic advantage. Chen's weapon was shaking. You're a traitor. You're working for the Taliban. Rollins shook his head. I'm working for Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, Private First Class James Washington, and 8 other soldiers who were killed in an ambush 4 months ago. The same Taliban cell that's on that ridgeline right now. I've spent every day since then trying to find them, track them, get close enough to matter. Elena felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. You've been feeding them information to earn their trust. Rollins nodded. Small things at first, routes they could observe, but not intercept, timing windows that were already public knowledge. I built a reputation as someone who could be bought. Tonight was supposed to be the payoff. I convinced them this convoy was worth exposing their entire cell for one perfect ambush. And then what? Chen demanded. You were going to stop the ambush and capture them? The sadness in Rollins's eyes deepened. No, sir. I was going to let them start the ambush. Then the 2 Apache helicopters I've had on standby for the past 3 hours were going to light up that entire ridgeline. Those fighters were going to die tonight, one way or another. But Captain Vasquez wasn't supposed to be here. I've been trying to keep this convoy safe, while also making it look valuable enough to attack. Elena's weapon was still pointed at Rollins, but her hand was trembling. You compromised base security. You violated every regulation. You put soldiers at risk. Rollins met her gaze steadily. Yes, ma'am, I did, because conventional operations weren't getting it done. We run convoys, they attack. We patrol, they ambush. We respond, they disappear into the mountains. They've been winning because they're willing to sacrifice more than we are. So I made them think they could win something big. And now they're exposed, committed and about to die. Chen's radio crackled to life, a voice Elena recognized as belonging to Major Harrison, the base commander. Raven 3, this is Sentinel Actual. We have you on UAV coverage. Be advised, hostile forces are maneuvering on your position from the eastern ridge. Gunships are 2 minutes out. Recommend you take cover immediately. Elena looked at Rollins. The Major knows. Rollins nodded. He's known from the beginning. This operation was his idea. I volunteered to be the asset. We needed someone the Taliban would believe. Someone with access and credibility. Someone willing to burn their career and possibly face a firing squad if it went wrong. Why? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Because 10 soldiers had died in an ambush, and someone needed to make it right. Because sometimes the only way to win was to sacrifice something valuable. Because Rollins had loved those soldiers like family, and revenge dressed up as justice was the only thing that made their deaths bearable. The sound of rotors filled the valley. 2 Apache helicopters materialized from the darkness, flying low and fast on the eastern ridgeline. Elena saw muzzle flashes as the Taliban fighters realized they'd been trapped and opened fire in desperation. The Apaches responded with devastating precision, their cannons turning the hillside into a storm of fire and shrapnel. It was over in 90 seconds. When the guns fell silent, Chen was sitting on the ground, his weapon forgotten. You used us as bait. You used this entire convoy. Rollins's voice was quiet. Yes, sir. And I would do it again, because those fighters killed 10 good soldiers, and they were planning more attacks. We stopped them. We saved lives. Elena holstered her weapon, her hands still shaking. At what cost, Sergeant? What happens now? You've admitted to unauthorized contact with enemy forces. You've admitted to compromising operational security. Even if Major Harrison authorized it, even if it worked, your career is over. Rollins smiled that sad smile again. Captain, my career ended 4 months ago when I watched 10 caskets get loaded onto a transport plane. Everything since then has just been finishing what I started. The convoy completed its mission that night, delivering the communications equipment to the forward observation post without further incident. By the time they returned to base at dawn, everyone knew what had happened. The story spread like wildfire. Some soldiers called Rollins a hero. Others called him a traitor who got lucky. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. Elena testified about what she'd discovered, what she'd witnessed, and what Rollins had admitted. Major Harrison confirmed that he'd authorized the operation as an off-books counterintelligence initiative, using Rollins as an unwitting asset to lure in a high-value target. The term unwitting was a careful lie. Rollins had known exactly what he was doing. In the end, the military did what the military does when faced with something that doesn't fit the regulations. They made it go away quietly. Rollins was given an administrative discharge with full honors. The official record stated that he had retired due to injury. The unofficial record, the one that mattered to the soldiers who served with him, told a different story. It said that Master Sergeant David Rollins had loved his men enough to sacrifice everything to avenge them. Elena never forgot that night in the valley. She thought about it during every convoy she managed, every maintenance log she reviewed, every decision she made about protocol versus pragmatism. Rollins had broken every rule, and he'd saved lives by doing it, but he'd also put soldiers at risk, used them as pawns in a personal vendetta, and violated the trust that held military units together. The question that haunted her wasn't whether Rollins was right or wrong. It was whether she would have the courage to do what he did if she ever faced a similar choice. Whether she could sacrifice her career, her reputation, maybe her freedom, for a cause she believed in. Whether following orders was always the same as doing the right thing. 6 months later, Elena received a letter. It came from an address in Montana, forwarded through multiple channels to maintain operational security. Inside was a single page, written in Rollins's neat handwriting. It said, "Captain Vasquez, thank you for giving me the chance to explain. That night, you could have shot first and asked questions later. You could have reported your suspicions earlier and stopped the operation. You did neither. Whether you realized it or not, you made a choice to let something play out, to trust that there might be more to the story than what you could see. That's what good officers do. They see the complexity, not just the regulations. The 10 soldiers we avenged that night would have liked you. Stay safe, stay sharp, and remember that sometimes the hardest enemy to fight is the one inside yourself. The voice that tells you to follow orders, even when orders are wrong. The military needs soldiers who follow orders, but it also needs soldiers who know when to think for themselves. Be both." David Rollins. Elena pinned that letter to the wall of her quarters. Every morning, she read it before starting her shift, and every morning, she made the same promise: to be the kind of officer who saw the complexity, who understood that right and wrong weren't always clearly marked on a map. who had the courage to question orders when questioning was needed, and the wisdom to follow them when following was right. The unseen enemy wasn't the Taliban fighters on that ridgeline. It was the comfortable certainty that regulations always had the answers. That duty was simple. That sacrifice only counted when it came in approved forms. Rollins had taught her that the hardest battles weren't fought against obvious enemies. They were fought in the space between what you were ordered to do and what you believed was right. 3 years later, Elena made captain and then major. She never forgot that night in the valley, and when she faced her own impossible choice, when regulations and conscience collided in a situation that had no good answers, she thought about Rollins, about the sad smile, and the quiet admission that he would do it all again, about the 10 soldiers who died, and the 10 who lived, because someone was willing to sacrifice everything to make it right. The lesson she carried forward wasn't about breaking rules. It was about understanding why rules existed and being brave enough to question them when they stopped serving their purpose, about loving your soldiers enough to make the hard choices, even when those choices destroyed you, about being willing to lose everything for something that mattered more than rank or recognition. The unseen enemy is certainty, the false comfort of knowing you're following orders and therefore can't be wrong. Master Sergeant David Rollins destroyed his career to prove that sometimes the only way to win is to sacrifice what you love most. And in doing so, he showed every soldier who heard his story that real courage isn't following orders without question. It's understanding when those orders need to be questioned and having the strength to face the consequences. That's what separates good soldiers from great ones. Not the medals, not for the promotions, the willingness to see the complexity and act anyway, knowing the cost might be everything. Remember that the next time someone tells you duty is simple, it never is, and the soldiers who pretend otherwise are the ones who've never faced a choice that mattered. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about courage and sacrifice in a new way, do me a favor, hit that like button right now, drop a comment below, and tell me about a time when you had to choose between what was right and what was expected. Have you ever faced a moment where duty and conscience pulled you in opposite directions? I want to hear your story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone wrestling with a difficult choice or questioning whether they have the courage to stand up for what they believe in, share this video with them. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every week I bring you stories like this. Real stories about real courage, about the moments that define us, and the choices that change everything. These aren't just military tales. They're lessons about leadership, sacrifice, and the complicated truth that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking all the rules. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe now. And remember, the bravest thing you can do isn't following orders without question. It's understanding when those orders need to be questioned and having the strength to face whatever comes next.